CENTCOM confirmed it. 3 U.S. aircraft carriers are operating in the Middle East simultaneously: the USS Gerald R. Ford, the USS Abraham Lincoln, and the USS George H.W. Bush. All 3 in the same region at the same time. The last time this happened was 2003, during the Iraq War, when the United States was launching the largest ground invasion since World War II. The USS George H.W. Bush didn't take the Suez Canal. It sailed around Africa, through the Indian Ocean, to reach its position. That routing decision alone tells you something about the operational calculation behind this deployment. CENTCOM says this force includes more than 200 Navy aircraft and around 15,000 sailors and Marines. 3 nuclear-powered floating air bases positioned in the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean simultaneously. Iran is surrounded on 3 maritime fronts at once. That has never happened before in this conflict. But here is what 3 carriers actually can do, and what they quietly cannot, that changes everything about how you should read this moment. 3 carriers, 200 aircraft, 15,000 personnel. And the single greatest threat to all of it right now is not Iran's missiles or drones. It is 21 miles of water and what Iran put inside it. To understand what 3 carriers actually represent, you have to understand what 1 carrier represents. A U.S. supercarrier is a nuclear-powered vessel roughly the length of 3 football fields. It carries approximately 60 to 70 aircraft: FA-18 Super Hornets for strike missions, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, E-2D Hawkeye command aircraft that function as airborne control towers, and MH-60 helicopters. A full carrier strike group surrounding that ship includes guided missile destroyers, cruisers capable of intercepting ballistic missiles, and submarines operating silently below the surface. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the Navy's newest and most advanced carrier using electromagnetic launch systems and next-generation sensors, is operating in the Red Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln is positioned in the Arabian Sea, approximately 800 miles from Iranian targets. The USS George H.W. Bush arrived via the Indian Ocean after sailing around Africa. 3 carriers in the Red Sea, Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean means carrier presence on every maritime approach to Iran simultaneously. Military experts say 3 carriers allow the U.S. to launch airstrikes, defend shipping lanes, intercept drones and missiles, enforce blockades, protect Gulf allies, and hold reserve forces ready if the conflict expands. The question nobody is asking is whether 6 simultaneous missions and 3 carriers are the same thing, or whether one of those missions makes the others harder. Everything you just learned about what 3 carriers can do is true. What's also true is that all of it depends on one thing the carriers don't control. The central tension in this buildup is not firepower. It is geography, specifically 21 miles of water called the Strait of Hormuz and what Iran has embedded inside it. The Pentagon reported to Congress that Iran placed up to 20 naval mines in and around the strait. Mine-clearing operations could take up to 6 months and cannot begin until a durable ceasefire exists. Roughly 1/5 of global oil trade passes through the waters near Hormuz. The 3 carrier strike groups are positioned to monitor multiple routes simultaneously. But the strait itself, where Iranian fast attack craft operate, is where 33 Iranian speedboats armed with anti-ship missiles and machine guns are currently deployed. 20 Iranian gunships were observed in the middle of the strait, laying additional mines during the ceasefire period. Iran previously stated it would remove those mines. U.S. officials say it did not. Large naval vessels do not move easily through mined, shallow, congested waters. The carriers project power from a distance. The strait is where Iran's asymmetric capability lives, designed specifically to operate in the environment where carrier strike groups are least effective. AD break. When 3 carrier groups, Iranian speedboats and mines, IRGC drones over Iraq, and unidentified aircraft over Tehran triggering anti-aircraft fire, all operate in tight, congested waters simultaneously. The risk is not only deliberate escalation, it is miscalculation. An intercept that goes wrong, a warning shot misread in real time, a drone whose origin is misidentified. Military experts note that the probability of an unintended incident increases proportionally with the density of armed assets in proximity. The Gulf, Red Sea, and Arabian Sea are now crowded with the military hardware of multiple nations, some with no reliable communication channels between them. 3 carriers equal around-the-clock strike capability if ordered. They also equal around-the-clock exposure to the conditions that have historically preceded wars nobody planned to start. The buildup did not happen in a vacuum. It happened during a ceasefire, one that has already expired. Hold that specific timing in mind for the next 2 minutes. It changes everything. Here is the false resolution most coverage of this buildup is offered. 3 carriers equals maximum pressure, and maximum pressure equals the conditions for a deal. That logic is not wrong. It is incomplete. The 3 carriers did not assemble in a vacuum. They assembled during a ceasefire in which Iran placed additional mines in Hormuz, deployed 33 speedboats and 20 gunships in the Strait, physically prevented its own negotiating team from boarding a plane to Islamabad, seized 3 commercial vessels, and launched kamikaze drones over Iraq. Iran used the ceasefire period to increase its operational posture, not reduce it. The USS George H.W. Bush sailed around Africa through the Indian Ocean, a routing that adds significant transit time, suggesting the deployment timeline was not driven by an imminent diplomatic breakthrough requiring rapid positioning. It was a sustained, deliberate buildup executed across weeks, while Washington was simultaneously assessing that diplomacy was not producing results. The political message of 3 carriers is aimed at multiple audiences simultaneously. Tehran, Gulf allies needing visible reassurance. China and Russia tracking carrier positioning as an indicator of American strategic intent. Domestic political audiences for whom visible military strength is its own justification. The carriers cannot clear 20 mines from 21 miles of strait. They cannot neutralize 33 dispersed speedboats hiding in coastal inlets. They cannot force the IRGC to allow Iran's diplomatic faction to negotiate. What they can do is launch sustained, around-the-clock airstrikes against fixed Iranian military infrastructure if that order comes. That is the capability this buildup actually represents, not deterrence, not negotiating leverage. Strike readiness at scale, sustained indefinitely, positioned on 3 fronts. Washington has assembled the largest naval air concentration in the Middle East in more than 20 years. Iran has spent the ceasefire mining the only waterway that concentration cannot easily enter. That's the buildup. That's the geometry. Now, here's the part that determines whether 3 carriers produce a deal or a war, and it has nothing to do with either side's military capability. Here's what CENTCOM confirmed: USS Gerald R. Ford, USS Abraham Lincoln, USS George H.W. Bush, all operating simultaneously. More than 200 Navy aircraft, approximately 15,000 sailors and Marines. The first 3 carrier concentration in the region since 2003. Here is what the carriers can do: launch airstrikes, defend shipping lanes, intercept drones and missiles, enforce blockades, protect Gulf allies, hold reserves ready. Here is what the carriers cannot do: clear mines from a mined strait, neutralize 33 dispersed fast attack craft, force the IRGC to allow Iran's diplomats to negotiate, or reverse a ceasefire that expired with Iran's judiciary chief on record saying a definite response is coming. 3 nuclear-powered floating air bases, 200 aircraft, 15,000 personnel, surrounding Iran on every maritime approach simultaneously. The last time the United States assembled a comparable force concentration in this region, it preceded an invasion that lasted 20 years. Nobody is saying this is that. The carriers are saying something. The question is whether anyone in Tehran with authority to respond is listening, or whether the ones with authority have already decided they don't need to. The comment worth leaving: do you think 3 carriers in position accelerates a diplomatic outcome by making Iran's cost of refusal undeniable? Or does the visible scale of the force give Iranian hardliners exactly the narrative they need to justify continued defiance domestically? Both arguments are serious. Subscribe if you want this followed in real time, because the next development, whether an Iranian response, a resumed strike order, or a diplomatic signal from Beijing, will require the full context of what you just learned to understand correctly. The next video covers the specific strike packages the 3 carriers are capable of executing against Iranian infrastructure, what targets exist, what hardening Iran has, what a sustained air campaign actually looks like operationally versus what it looks like in headlines. The gap between those 2 things is significant. And it's the gap that determines whether this buildup ends in a deal or in something that makes 2003 look small.